Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I am your host, Brian Slagel. I'm the CEO of Metal Blade Records, home to bands like Amon Amarth, Slayer, Metallica, Sirathungal, Killswitch Engage, Cannibal Corpse, Guar, on and on and on. You can go look it up on the internet. And also the home to, actually the first band that I ever signed was a band called Bitch. And we will be talking to Betsy Bitch later on during this episode about the amazing song I'm 18 by Alice Cooper. I feel this is a very important song in terms of heavy metal. Came out in 1970, where there was not a lot of heavy music happening. You had basically Zeppelin and Sabbath, a few other things, but this was a mainstream hit with a heavy background to it. So it was very essential, I think, in the formation of metal. And you talk to any band known to man, pretty much, and they're all influenced by Cooper. So that's why you're going to hear a few Alice Cooper songs as we go out through this podcast. And today is 18. So you guys have to check out our friends at Old Glory. Old Glory offers over 300,000 items for music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture fans, featuring officially licensed merch from iconic brands and top sports teams. Discover the perfect fan gear, and you can save with our exclusive discount. When you go to oldglory.com and buy your stuff, enter the code METAL1982. Again, that's Metal 1982. You're going to get 15% off of your order. So go to oldglory.com, check out their stuff, and buy some things. Thank you. Check out our friends at herocarepackages.com. Show your support with Hero Care Packages, premium military care packages curated to uplift our service members. If you want to help out and give our service members something fun, you can go to the site herocarepackages.com. You can create your own package, customizable, to send to our service members, and they will greatly appreciate it. We know that. We appreciate what they do, and they need stuff. So again, go to herocarepackages.com, enter the code METAL1982, and you'll get 10% off your order, and you can customize it, upload it, and send some really cool stuff to our amazing service members. And again, herocarepackages.com. Also going to talk to Jay Ruston, producer, who's also has a lot of information about this because his mentor was Jack Richardson, who was the one who hired Bob Ezrin and had Ezrin produce Alice Cooper. So lots of good stuff this episode. But going to begin it all with our good friend north of the border who knows everything about everything because he's written 150 books on metal and hard rock. Mr. Martin Popoff.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, bold choice with I'm 18. The situation here is we've got a song that it's important to the heavy metal story because it gave us the Alice Cooper band. You know, Alice Cooper was in danger of losing their deal with Warner Brothers, but this song saved that album, and all of a sudden, Love It to Death was issued properly on Warner Brothers, and they were on Warner moving forward, and they became this big band that had a huge part of the heavy metal story. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Bob Ezrin heard that song when he went and saw them at Max's Kansas City and got into it, and he kept saying, "Oh, what's that song? I'm edgy, I like that one." And so, no, it's I'm 18, right? And I wanted to read you a little bit about what why this is important as well in terms of, you know, creating this sort of anthem for the youth situation. So Alice Cooper told me, this is from my book Easy Action, which is a timeline and quotes book on this whole Alice Cooper situation. He says, 18 was just a riff I used to jam to warm up to. I remember when we first started to do 18, it was in Detroit. We used to rehearse in this dump, and everyone had a bottle of Boone's Farm apple wine. It was just the worst. I mean, I don't think it's ever seen anything except chemicals. It was just the worst, and we'd all have a bottle of that, and that was just the corporate progression sings it. And it was a good riff for everybody to warm up and jam a little bit on, and Bob Ezrin kept hearing that, and he kept saying, you know, that's a really good riff. And he would listen to us rehearse, and he'd say, let's make something out of that. Here's the important part. And again, it's one of those things that I would like to say, it was during the war, the end of the war, and there was always that controversy of I'm a boy and I'm a man. I can go get killed for my country, but I can't buy a beer. So 18 was that juxtaposition of being both. And then when it sounded like a complaint, then it turns the corner. It says, I'm 18, I've got angst, I don't know what I am, I don't know if I'm a boy or a man, and I like it. And that was the selling point of that. It was the fact that instead of I hate it, it was I'm 18 and I like it. And everybody related to that and said, yeah, I dig being screwed up. So it's this great youth anthem. And like I say, it gave us the Alice Cooper band. It gave them life. It almost subtly creates this heavy metal army, or like, you know, what the Aerosmith guys used to call the Blue Jean Army of the Midwest. You know, this new kind of big collection of hard rock fans, young boys kind of thing. So it was very inspirational for that. The other way it's kind of interesting and important is that it's a ballad ballad, but it's a dark ballad, so it's almost in that heavy metal dirge range. Like, I know there's a little bit of a stretch, but when you get all the way to, say, Metallica with Fade to Black and, establishing the thrash ballad. So along the way, you do get these heavy songs that are dark ballads that aren't exactly love songs. Black Sabbath would do a lot of very, very quiet songs that fit in this department as well. So yeah, in that respect, it's almost like an ancillary heavy metal song that isn't very heavy. It's just got that simple, dependable Louie Louie chords kind of riff, arpeggiated. So it's not even like power chords. It's a little bit louder when you get to the chorus and that. The guys make a little bit of noise. But yeah, it's a super important song. We know that Johnny Rotten, when he auditioned for the Sex Pistols, they did that song. I just did on my own podcast. I was talking about Eater, this punk band from the UK who were known for being super young. They were like 15, 16 years old when they did that first album called The Album, and they did a song on that called I'm 15. So yeah, it was just a variation on it. So I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, it's a good choice. So it has a lot of levels of importance, even though it in itself is not a heavy metal song. I mean, it went to number 21 on the charts, and like I say, it got them going. It got them firmly established with Warner Brothers rather than being this discreet Warner sort of situation. And that album was an absolute hit. It was the song that carried Love It to Death towards platinum, and then they were on from there and had a great career. So there you go, Alice Cooper, I'm 18.
Thank you, Martin. All sorts of great information. I love having Martin do this because, as you heard, you're hearing a lot of stuff that I don't even know. So he's digging up all the really good stuff, and it's nice to have the historical part of the song as well. And
the world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use, helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize, so you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
once again, we welcome in producer extraordinaire. His discography is too long. We'd be here for 30 minutes if I mentioned everything he's done. But just look him up. He's done literally everybody on the entire planet, and they all sound really good. My friend, Mr. J. Ruston, how are you, sir?
Excellent, Brian. How are you?
I'm excited to talk again about Alice Cooper. People ask me, like, well, what's the podcast about and what are you kind of talking about? I said, well, a lot of it is, in my estimation, is more almost educational something. A lot of people go like, Alice Cooper, heavy metal, does that make any sense? Well, yeah. I mean, if it wasn't for Alice Cooper, a lot of stuff would not be happening, not only just image-wise, but just song-wise as well. And I think a lot of these early songs especially are really pivotal to what was going on, because you got to remember, these songs came out in the early 70s. Like, it was only pretty much Sabbath and maybe Zeppelin, and that was about it for the early stages of metal. And I always felt that Alice Cooper was extremely important. And this song, I'm 18, being one, not only because of the music, but because of the lyrics, and it was a hit. And it was a pretty heavy song to have on the radio in 1971.
Well, there's a lot about this song I could talk about. And I feel close to Alice Cooper's this part of his career in general, because my mentor and teacher, Jack Richardson, had such a huge part of his career, sending Bob Ezrin to New York to see him play, telling Bob, don't sign him, just go check him out. And, Bob coming back to Toronto and saying, well, I signed him. And Jack said, well, you're producing them. And, all these great stories. But, Jack is, of course, credited as a producer and executive producer on this record, as he is on a few of the early Cooper records, such as Muscle of Love and so on and so forth. But again, it was mostly Bob's baby, but, Jack, of course, heavily involved. The urban legend from Jack himself was that Jack Bruce from Cream played some of the trickier bass stuff, including the song $1 Billion Babies, and I've never gotten that verified, but next time I see Garth, I will ask him. Jack's son, of course. But yeah, even rewinding to my childhood growing up in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, my exposure to music and rock and roll was Detroit, the Riff, WLLZ, some of the other classic rock stations. And they played so much Alice Cooper that I didn't even own any of his records. They literally played the entire albums on the air throughout my entire teenage years. And of course, I Am the Greatest Hits and some of the others. But yeah, it was just constant. And I always loved the production, especially the drums. I loved the punchy snare drum, and especially the intro to like the song "Billion Dollar Babies," and like the way he hit it, and just a great band. But I think that this song sounds amazing, and it's got the right vibe and darkness for the lyrics and the vibe.
100%. And by the way, the single came out in November 1970, and the record came out obviously in 1971. So I do stand corrected there, which is even more crazy that, that, like I said, there was really not much going on there. And I've always argued that, Alice Cooper, to me, and a lot of other people as well, was kind of one of the founding fathers, really, of heavy metal. And a lot of people go, I don't, Sabbath. And look, Sabbath is the one. But Cooper was doing a lot of heavy stuff back then. Even this song, even though it was a hit song, it still is a song they play live and all these years later. But some of the underlying riffs and guitar tones and stuff especially are pretty heavy.
And if you think about it, it's heavy in the way AC/DC is heavy, whereas it's the riff that's heavy. The guitar sounds, it's fairly clean, really, if anything. But the way they play those riffs and the tone, if you imagine it with a modern guitar sound, they would have gone, much chunkier. To me, that's what gives it its sort of creepiness and its scariness as a teenager, at least, was like, wow, this song sounds really dark. And then the solo, the way he double bends those notes, it's just, I love it and always have, and it's just so good.
This is, of course, the first record that Bob Ezrin produced. The Alice Cooper Band had put out 2 records prior to this on Frank Zappa's label, which were very proggy, weird, nonsensical in some ways sometimes. And Ezrin obviously came in and he completely remolded and reformed the band into what they became, which was this massive rock and roll metal band. What are your thoughts about how that transformation happened?
I think that Bob Ezrin was a gifted producer from the day he stepped into a studio, and Jack being his mentor. And by that time, Jack was already in the second half of his career. He'd already produced, 10 Guess Who albums, found them in a garage in Winnipeg and heard them playing American Woman. Was like, whoa, what the hell is that? He went from producing Coca-Cola commercials to one of the biggest bands on the planet. So you've got this incredible mentor that knows how to produce records, and he would kick people's ass in the studio. Jack took no prisoners, which doesn't happen now. Now you just fix everything, and who cares if somebody can't play, apparently, is how some people make records, not me. But back then, it was play or die, basically. So Bob clearly took that attitude with him, as you see when he worked with Kiss and even Pink Floyd, bringing in outside musicians, which was unheard of, but he did it to get what he needed. And, I think this record is the band. It sounds like it. I'm sure it is. Maybe he brought in a guitar lead player. I haven't actually researched that too heavily on this album, but I think he just knew how to get musicians to play great, and they just had enough time in the studio. They had money, so they would do it right and edit tape, and he always had killer engineers. He knew how to get it out of them. Clearly with Kiss, look what he did on Destroyer compared to the records before and after it.
By the way, Dennis Dunaway's book is far and away the best book of all of the Alice Cooper related books. Even Alice himself said it's the best book.
Yeah, for sure.
And he talks a lot about who people that came in and didn't come in. By the way, Dennis Dunaway looks like he's going to be a guest on this show at some point upcoming soon, which I'm very excited about. We'll be talking even more Alice Cooper. But yeah, they did have some guys, and that was kind of a thing with even Jack Richardson too, because Aerosmith had people come in and play sometimes they were just so messed up, I guess they couldn't really play it.
Well, yeah, Jack Douglas became part of their trio,
Yep.
The 3 of them,
Yep.
in the 70s, Nimbus 9.
Yeah, exactly. I think on this record, from what I recollect, was that it was pretty much the band was playing everything on this record. I know Billion Dollar Babies, they had a lot of people come in and play different parts. Like Glenn Buxton at that point was not functioning very well, but I'm pretty sure that this record is the actual band. And it's like, what a step up. I came into Alice Cooper, even though I'm old, I came in a little bit later. I think it was probably 74 maybe that I first heard Billion Dollar Babies and got into that record, then went backwards obviously to this record. And wow, it's like I had never heard the first two records before until much later after that, because they kind of were at that point, they might in the mid 70s, they might have even been out of print, I'm not sure, but I never heard those records so much later.
Yeah, it's like listening to Fleetwood Mac before Lindsay and Stevie. It's the same thing. It's a developing band doing something, and then you have this producer comes in who completely understands music and hit songs and how to make hit records, as in Jack. But his
and I still,
Bob,
I've talked a lot on this podcast about it, but I guess I'm somewhat biased because I grew up in the 70s, and that's when I discovered all of this amazing music.
So
but I still love the
probably
production quality stuff in the 70s. I love it because it's all the instruments. Like there's no tape, there's maybe some reverb or a few things here and there, but everybody's playing their parts and sounding like they sound. And I just love the way, especially this record and Killer, the first two, I just love the production because it's very simple but very powerful at the same time.
I think there's a few reasons for that too. Is the 60s, obviously there was a huge amount of experimentation going on. You had mono to 2-track to 4-track to 8-track. Eventually we're hitting 16-track, and even by the early 70s there's 24-track. So you would think that would send them into overdrive with like overdubs and doing all this crazy stuff. But the sound quality just kept getting better and better and better with these huge, 2-inch tapes as opposed to 1-inch and 1/2-inch. So now when they're playing in the studio, the sound coming through the speakers while they're playing ends up being the same as when the engineer presses play and they listen back to it, which up to that point didn't necessarily happen. Tape changes the way things sound. And I've read interviews with countless engineers who crossed over from the 60s into the 70s, and with all that technology change, saying, I always wish the band could hear themselves playing in the studio instead of hearing it back off tape, because it just didn't reproduce the same. And, clearly that changed. And when you have that level of recording quality, just huge step up in the early 70s, and then the consoles were changing, EMI was building their own board, and Neve was coming out with some of their best stuff at that point. And then you add in these great producers, musicians that could play, cared about their craft, clearly practiced, and then the excitement of nobody else had done it yet, so you're the first, certainly in the hard rock and metal genre. There's just so many factors, I think, that led to those recordings sounding so damn good.
Yeah, obviously Ezrin, could clearly do what he was doing in the studio. And like I said, just the transformation to me was just so insane, because the first two records, you wouldn't believe it's the same band. And it's the same band. They sound completely different. The songs are structured and they're much better. By the way, there's a song on this record, too, that I also go back to, Black Juju, which if you take out that stupid organ that's in that song, if you listen to the backing riff, like that riff that's like Sabbath-y heavy riff. And there were some of that stuff on both this and Killer as well. It's just so good. And again, that's what really drew me to Cooper, was obviously I love the imagery and I love the taking risks. And, also at this time, this is really kind of before he became Public Enemy #1, basically, where he was the most controversial guy on the planet. But they were gearing up to that with this record, obviously. And it's such an interesting song, because, the lyrical content is all, rebellious youth, which is just kind of perfect. So it became this anthem. And you had that great, riff, dun, 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 just so good. Everything about the song just kind of came together. And I know Bob Ezrin had a lot to do with that.
Of course. And I think you have many things happening. Obviously, what we were saying about technology. So now they're able to make these incredible recordings because things are just getting better. And then you have Bob and Jack's songwriting production sense, combined with a band that was clearly a little over the map on those previous two records. And it's sort of a magic potion.
I would love to wonder what the vibe was in the studio. Again, Dennis Dunaway's book, and I've read both of Alice's books and also the other guy's books, Michael Bruce. But it's always interesting when they're in the studio for this record, because I think they felt more of a band in there, and that they were getting what they wanted to on the recordings a lot. I know Ezrin worked really, really hard with them, but I don't know that any of them really, they were so young that they thought that this was going to be such a groundbreaking record.
Including Bob. I mean, he had a lot to prove too, because he had Jack basically saying to him, well, this is your responsibility, you know? So he had something to prove. He clearly has a gift. And then you have these young musicians who want to make it. So you add all that together and boom, they make an absolutely brilliant record, which does not surprise me whatsoever. But the songs had to be there, which they are.
Yeah, and if you look back in time now, obviously, Ezrin's had this insane career, and so has Alice, and it kind of makes sense looking in the rearview mirror that this would work. But I'm always fascinated by like the stuff. Like I love to read autobiographies. It's my thing when I travel and fly. And to me, I love the parts where the bands first get together and kind of release that first album that really does well. There's a real innocence about what was happening and what was going on, and even with the production thing too. I mean, this was. If you listen to Ezrin's later stuff, like Bill and Our Babies, for example, where there's just a million things going on and all sorts of panning and different voices and instruments,
orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. This was, pretty much other than that dreaded organ on the Black Future, it was pretty much just a rock and roll band.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would ask Jack so many questions, and of course, a lot of his stories involve so many other bands. He pissed off a lot of musicians by bringing in, ringers, or just, making them do stuff over and over and over again until they got it right. And Bob, the same, obviously. And he just had so many great stories about that era and how special it was. And it was easy, again, for him to look back and go, oh, yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, right? It's pretty incredible. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you doing this as always. I know you're headed out again to overseas to do another record. So safe travels, and we will talk to you when you get back.
Sounds great. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So our orders get all backed up. We're drowning in paperwork, then actually drowning, careless fighting off sharks with a stapler, and pirates are pillaging the office copier, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant goes beyond the resume, using unique insights to deliver a smarter shortlist. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
Me on again.
Well, now we get to bring in a living legend.
Am I still living?
Yes, you're still living, and you're still absolutely a legend.
Well, I am in my living room, so I guess that's something.
One of the first female heavy metal front persons, the incredible Betsy Bitch from the band Bitch. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, Brian. How are you doing? Great to see you.
Always good to see you. We just saw you recently. We just saw each other at Metal Massacre premiere not too long ago.
Yeah, that was great. I had a great time.
That was fun. I'll do a quick plug for that. Go to Thunderflix, Flix. It's an app that you can get anywhere. And Metal Massacre documentaries there where you can see the lovely Betsy Bitch talk a lot about the early days of the LA metal scene, as well as all the other bands that were on the record.
Yeah, it's a great vehicle with which to revisit the 80s.
Yeah, it's fun. And of course, I wanted you to be on the podcast because you should be here. And of course, I knew who to ask, the person that you want to talk about, because he's tattooed on your arm. We're, of course, talking about Alice Cooper.
I always say if there was never an Alice Cooper, there wouldn't have been a Betsy Bitch. And then where the hell would we be? Especially if there were never an Alice Cooper. More so than if there were never me.
That's why I like to talk about Alice on this podcast, because, even though it's 100 songs to define heavy metal, I think that Alice had so much to do in the early 70s with really, there wasn't a lot going on back then. There's Zeppelin, Sabbath, and really Cooper were kind of the three heavier bands out there. And some of this stuff, even I'm 18, which we're talking about today, like the riffs and parts of that song are still pretty heavy for 1970.
I think that was the nucleus behind releasing it, is that, Bob Ezrin heard that riff and, he said, this is, definitely a song that's going to go somewhere. And he started out thinking Alice was saying, I'm edgy.
Let's see, I took some notes here. Sorry. I got a
Oh,
cheat
nice.
sheet
No, that's
here.
good.
It was their first top 40 hit. It peaked at 21. It was backside was Is It My Body? And I think it started out a longer version and Ezrin kind of trimmed it down to be a more commercially viable length.
Yep. Where did you first hear Alice Cooper?
A boyfriend of my sister when I think I was 13 and she was 14. We lived in New Jersey. I was born in Atlantic City. I lived in Brigantine, which is just over the bridge from Atlantic City. But my father remained back east. So when my sister Jane and I were teenagers, we used to go back and stay with him for the whole summer at my mother's very motivated urging. Get out of here. We were out of school and she wanted to do her thing. So she sent us back east. It was her summer boyfriend. His name was Harry Parker. Can't believe I remembered his name. And he had just bought Love It to Death. And we were over at his apartment. I remember it was a summer night. It was like hot and humid. And I just remember everything about it because I was just like bowled over by what I was hearing. And he put Love It to Death on the turntable and it was just instant, mesmerization on my part, if that's even a word. And especially, 18 jumped out at me, but so many other good songs on that album.
Yeah, it's an amazing record. And you came in right as this record was happening, which is pretty amazing. I came in a few years later because I didn't hear about any of this stuff.
Because you're younger than I am. Everybody is.
No. Did you hear any heavy music before this? Was it the first time you heard something kind of heavy?
I was still sort of coming out of the, the pop Beatles and, Paul Revere and the Raiders and all the, the 60s bands that, I had the, the 45s of. Even those bands, I always sort of gravitated towards the, really hooky, kind of heavy, bordering on hard rock type songs and arrangements. So that, when I heard Alice, I was still hearing the hooks and the melodic melodies and vocals, but there was just something edgier about it, no pun intended. There was just something that kind of, drew me in a little bit more. And that was really, how I first started, really digging hard rock, and then, metal sort of came after that.
Yeah. And again, like I said, this song was so heavy for when it came out. I mean, the subject matter is obviously I'm 18. It's a very teenage angst song, very, very much a ballad-ish, but certainly a pop heavy song. And I've said a huge radio hit, which is, I know for the band was pretty unbelievable, but some of those underlying riffs though, to me, I mean, those were the early signs, and a lot of stuff on this record, those are the early signs of heavy metal.
Sticking on the subject of that particular song, the subject matter was a lot that the listener, the young listener could hold on to. I'm 18 and I don't know what I want. But yeah, that was, I would classify Alice as the first really early hard rock, almost bordering on metal band, when there really weren't that many around, like you said, Zeppelin. I don't really consider them metal, but definitely hard rock and Sabbath, so there were only a handful of them around. I think when Alice came around, he sort of, perpetuated that trend.
And then, a lot of people also think more, when you talk about early 70s Alice Cooper, they think more about the stage show and all the crazy stuff he was doing. I mean, he was definitely probably the most hated man in the world for a while in the 70s. But that all kind of came after this record came out. And, when this record came out, I don't think nobody really knew who they were. And the first song most people heard, because it was played on the radio, was 18, obviously.
Right. No, people hated him before that. I'm sure you've heard the stories about how they used to drive people out they would flee for the exits when they came on. Their music was so raw back then, and Alice was just doing anything just to get, anyone's attention. So it was probably oftentimes, really out there. I'm sure they dug that too, because at least they were getting a reaction out of people.
Well, that was the famous story when they played, I think it was the Whiskey, or I forget where it was, but Frank Zappa went to go see them, and they emptied the room out in like 10 minutes. And Frank said, anybody that can have this sort of reaction, I want to work with. And then he signed them to his label, and they put out those first two very strange records. And then Bob Ezrin came in and all of a sudden had the Midas touch, and they became this amazing band.
Yeah, I mean, I've got those two first albums, and I'm sorry, Alice, I nothing but love for you, but they weren't very good. I didn't really hear anything. And I kind of listened to him, after I discovered Alice. And I'm like, he got so much better after that, love it to death. Like I said, I dig practically every single song on that album.
Yeah, it's an amazing, amazing record. I was talking we talked to Jay Ruston about the production end of things. And I've said this a lot, that if you look at Black Juju, especially if you take off that stupid organ that drives me crazy, but that's a metal song. That's like almost a Black Sabbath riff on that song, which is so good.
Yeah, it's very dark.
Yeah.
Wait, Halo of Flies is not on Love It to Death, is it?
No, Halo, that's on Killer.
Right. Okay. Well, I was, kind of likening that to Halo of Flies because, it's very, there's a lot more instrumentation than there is vocals, and a lot of, different, strange, odd parts, so they're both kind of similar.
Yeah. That's probably the predecessor. When did you first see Alice Cooper live?
I can tell you right off the bat, I saw him at the Hollywood Palladium with my sister and our mutual best friend, Diane. Maybe 74. I can't remember the year, but it was the Love It to Death tour. So I guess it must have been earlier on than that.
And what was your reaction to what you saw on stage?
Oh, I was just fixated, and all the next day, we were like acting out all the parts, and we went and bought, these giant black balloons because he had like these black balloons he was bouncing around on stage. And we were just, we were obsessed, and after that, it was just, all Alice all the time for me.
I don't blame you. When did you want to become a singer and be in a band?
Probably, well, it was in the late 70s, like 77, 78. And I joined, just answered some ads, in the recycler when that's where you used to look for, musical connections, and I ended up with a couple of, just garage rehearsal type bands. We had like some minor gigs at, American Legions and, and things like that. And that was about 77, 78, I want to say. And then I joined the Box Boys after that. That was really my first, recording, performing band and my actual, entrance into, professional singing, like on stage and in the studio and recording.
So seeing Alice, did that give you your first inclination? Like, hey, I think I can do that, or I want to be in a band too?
Seeing Alice, absolutely, gave me the desire to be not only just a singer, but a performer, hence the Betsy Bitch persona, and I always was just so down with his description of, you go see a band live, you don't want to just see them, standing there on stage, you want something visual, if not, you can just go home and listen to their music on your turntable. So I kept that in mind. That was definitely an inspiration. His theatrics, his, songs being about something other than, I love you, honey, cupcake, just, kind of straying from that a little bit. And then as far as my other, inspirations, when I, was looking up on stage at people and saying, I can do that, you'll appreciate this. Freddie Moore from the New Cats. He was a huge inspiration for me. I just used to think he was just the best performer anyway, ever. And he actually came down to one of our rehearsals and kind of coached me. And then I saw the Runaways at the Starwood around, the same time period. And, Sherry Curry, was great, especially for her age, very confident and, had a lot of charisma on stage. And she was a girl, obviously a woman. And that was another epiphanal moment when I said, I can do that too, or I want to do that too. And I can do it just as well, if not better.
That's amazing. I didn't know about the Freddie Moore thing. For those of you who probably don't know, the Cats were a band that were in the late 70s, early 80s in Los Angeles. They're a new wave band that was really amazing. I was a massive fan of theirs as well.
Great songs.
Yeah, great songs. I still don't, to this day, have no idea why they weren't huge, because so many bands from that scene, Oingo Boingo and Walla Voodoo.
Me neither. That's one of the enigmas of my life.
Well, and another reason why I ended up kind of, putting out that compilation record, I just didn't want to see that happen to other bands that were good. But Freddie's, I guess his claim to fame, more or less, is he was married to a woman at the time named Demi Moore, who you might have heard of out there in podcasting land.
That's where she got the Moore.
Exactly. So that's interesting. And I guess because, you came in really early and became one of the very first female fronted like hard rock metal bands with Bitch, and also had the big show. Like, you guys put on a show every every time from the first time I ever saw you, it's like, wow, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here, which was amazing.
Well, it was David and Robbie's idea, the original guitar player and drummer, respectively, to put together an all-male band with a female singer and call it Bitch. And then, David wrote Live for the Whip, and, we started rolling with the image after that. But after that was introduced, to me initially, I rolled with it, and it was all, Alice sitting on my shoulder, telling me, to do this is going to look good, that's going to look good, be as theatrical as possible. So that when I did perform, back then with all the props and the whips and the slave that came out of the box and all, that was totally Alice inspired. And, I hope I wasn't ripping them off too much, but that's definitely, what I had in mind was entertaining and performing as well as singing.
Yeah, I mean, look, the two of my favorite bands growing up were Kiss and Alice Cooper. So I love theatrics. I love bands that do shows. I'm like you. I want to see something happening up on stage, not just guys sitting up there looking at their tennis shoes playing. I want to see a show. And I was obviously first got into Bitch because I really liked the music, and then went to the show and went, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there's this big show going on here. And back then, what you guys were doing on so many levels was very similar to Cooper in the fact it was very edgy, especially on the live front.
It was something that nobody else was doing, which I also thought kind of put us in a little more, on top of the metal heap of bands back then, so it was setting us apart, and it was giving us an image, as well as music to present to the fans.
And going back to I'm 18 for a little bit, did anything that Alice did vocally kind of creep into your style at all?
Oh, I loved his voice. It used to just get me hot and bothered because it wasn't conventional as mine isn't. Alice and I are not the best singers in the world, but we're, I think, good interpreters of songs. And I really enjoy telling the story of the song when I sing. That's why I like to write my own lyrics, because I like it to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I like it to make sense, not just, words that rhyme and yeah here and ooh there. I'd like it to be indicative of, a little, mini story, like a little book that you read from the beginning to the end. And then when you come to the end and it's over.
I think you bring up a really good point, because really in hard rock and metal, there aren't a lot of like classically amazing singers, but what they do is they emote so well. You wouldn't call Axl Rose a great singer, or even Brian Johnson or Bon Scott, but they emoted so well and it worked so well with the music. And even Alice, not a classically trained vocalist or anything, but he had that edge. And it was kind of like almost like early James Hetfield in his prime, with kind of that edge that he had.
Mm-hmm. The growl and the rasp and the growling, he didn't have a whole lot of vibrato, not anything that's like classically a great voice, yet, he brought it. He was on key, that's good. He had good, good tone and good pitch, and sang, interpreted the song well.
Like I said, I think you bring up such a great point about how it's the emoting the lyrics and singing the song. So it's more about the passion involved in the vocal performance than it really is about the aesthetics of it.
I'm a boy and I'm a man. I'm 18 and I like it. Yes, I like it. Oh, I like it. Love it. Like it. Love it. 18 and I like it.
When this record came out and you first heard it, obviously, and it probably had, like you said, kind of a life-changing pattern to it, how often would you listen? I mean, it wasn't that easy back then to listen to records. You had to get the turntable out and all that. So how often would you listen to that record when you first heard it?
Oh, multiple times a day, sometimes over and over, like consecutively, one side after the other, and turn it over and do it again. It was just... I loved all those songs. Caught in a Dream is one of my absolute favorite songs. I have that on my Spotify liked song list. Black Juju that we talked about. The Ballad of Dwight Fry, which live was just the highlight of the show, with the straight jacket. I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here. And, and Isn't My Body, which was very kind of commercial and poppy, but very sexy and kind of moody and smoky. But yeah, I mean, that whole album, Hallowed Be My Name, My Stars, they're just great. They're really prolific songwriters. And I was going to say before, when you were talking about, the most hated, when they were first coming out, and they were the most hated because everybody just couldn't stand listening to them. But then, after they became successful, and Alice had this image, where he's like beheading babies on stage and hanging himself and going under the guillotine. And so then the parents, hated them, but the kids still loved him. So he went through different periods of hate, but it was all good.
Yeah, and he was really one of the first originals original that was doing a lot of that stuff. Even before then, you had Elvis was hated just because of what he was doing, but Alice was the one that was really pushing the envelope with, like you said, doing all these crazy stuff on stage and hanging himself in the guillotine and spearing babies with his sword.
But he was doing it with a sense of humor, as opposed to the bands these days that do it and they just want to be dark and scary. But Alice, it was burlesque, and he always said that too. And I got it. I was never intimidated. I was ever like, oh my God, he's holding a baby doll by its leg, on stage. I was never offended by it. I always knew that it was in good fun and accompanied by, really kick-ass music. So there was nothing wrong with it as far as I was concerned.
Tongue firmly planted in his cheek. Absolutely. And
definitely.
He's one of the nicest people on the planet. I've been able to meet all the guys in the original Alice Cooper band, except unfortunately for Glenn Buxton. They're all so nice, so down to earth, like really cool. You look at them as how controversial they were in the 70s. They're just regular nice guys.
Yeah, they were a good group of guys, and they were all friends, when they first started out. I've met Alice a few times, and I actually have one picture with him, which actually was facilitated by you. You gained me entry into a dress rehearsal for the Operation Rock and Roll tour. You set it up for me, and I remember it was at a sound stage in Hollywood, and I got all decked out in my leather and my rhinestone bra, and I was like holding his leather jacket while he was performing. He gave it to me to hold, and then we took a picture together. And that I've got multiple framed photos around my house everywhere. So that was a huge memorable moment for me meeting him. And then I got backstage a couple other times for his shows, and he said he's heard of Bitch and he knows who Betsy Bitch is, and it sounded good even if he's not telling the truth. It was nice to hear. So yeah, I was able to meet him a couple times, and he is a very nice guy, very down to earth and nice. And, everybody knows that about him now. Family man.
Yeah. We reissued all those records back in the early 90s with Reuters, and I'd met him before then, but just such an awesome guy. It's so cool. And I love the stories about, and by the way, he does know who Bitch was, of course, and who you were.
Okay, I hope so. He could look me up. I've got a few pages on the internet.
No, he pays attention to music. In fact, I remember one time I saw him, we were talking about the Struts, and this was a band where nobody knew who they were at the time. There's an up-and-coming British rock band.
I remember.
He's like, man, I love this new band, the Struts. I go, I love them too. So he has his ears to the ground, even still to this day, more or less, which is great.
Yeah, and he's still rocking. I mean, he's still touring. His bands kick ass, and he looks great. He sounds great. He's still doing it at 70? I can't do the math. I think he was born in 46.
He's 77.
77.
Oh, okay. If I would have, subtracted, 1946 from 2025, I would have gotten it. But math wasn't my strong suit.
I thought he was like mid 70s, like 74, 75, 77. That's really impressive. Wow, that's insane.
That's pretty close to 80.
He doesn't look or sound it. He's still. I mean, I saw him like a year ago, and he still was amazing. His band, of course, are phenomenal too.
Yeah, well, and I don't think he wants any generations to go by without, missing Alice Cooper, without getting a little, Alice Cooper experience. So I'm glad that he's keeping it going, as long as he can. And, he doesn't look like he needs to stop anytime soon.
Let's hope not.
I see him every time he comes around.
Absolutely.
But I wrote down a couple, actually one cool thing that you didn't know, maybe you didn't know about 18. Did you know that Johnny Rotten auditioned for the Sex Pistols with that song?
Yeah, it's in there. If you watch the biopic, they showed that scene, they redepicted that scene, which was pretty amazing.
I can't tell you anything you don't already know, Brian. I didn't know that. I thought that was cool. And it speaks to the fact that, so many musicians and artists were influenced by them, and a lot of them fess up to it. I doubt if there was never Alice Cooper. I think Kiss was really influenced, by the makeup. Obviously, Marilyn Manson, very theatrical bands like Wasp. Even Motley Crue said they were a little I think everybody's a little influenced by Alice. You can't be a musician in this day and age and not have a little Alice, just to keep you going.
100%. I mean, I think he should get more credit than he does. Actually, I look at, and I love David Bowie. I've always been a big David Bowie fan, but people put Bowie on this incredible pedestal, And Alice, I always thought Alice was even more influential than Bowie was in a lot of ways, but he's still doing it. He's still a legend. He's still drawing great people. And like you said, there's a whole nother generation now of younger bands who are getting influenced by Alice Cooper, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think the thing with Bowie was that people were just really impressed by how many different transitions he went through as far as his image, and when he said Ziggy Stardust, this is the last show I'll ever do, who knew that he was going to recreate himself like, 5, 6, 7 more times. So I think that was the draw with Bowie. But, I definitely rank those two up there. I was very influenced by Bowie when I was in my little groupie teeny bopper, groupie days back in the early 70s. I used to hang out at Rodney's, and Bowie was a big deal back then. So yeah, that was part of my musical influences along with Alice.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a massive Bowie fan as well. I wish Alice was kind of up there with the way Bowie's respected. And I love Bowie. I think he was amazing and duly important for, like you said, just how many different things he did, how many different types of genres, and how he reinvented himself so many times. Brilliant guy. Well, I can't thank you enough for doing this. You were awesome, of course.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for doing this. And we'll have to do maybe your other band that you love, Cheap Trick, down the road or something.
I'm surprised I mentioned so many other bands. I'm surprised I didn't mention them. Cheap Trick. See, I can't even say it fast. So, but anyway, there's 3 of them. I do need to say that Robin Zander was my vocal inspiration. One and only. Okay, now I have closure.
All right. Thanks again for doing this. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody that's listening and has listened. And it was a pleasure to be Betsy Bitch at your service. You don't have to ask me twice to talk.
That's going to do it. I got to thank my guest, Betsy Bitch. Awesome having her on and having her talk about Alice, because she's got a tattoo of Alice Cooper, which is incredible. And also Jay Ruston is always coming on and talking about the production. Thanks to Lizzie Borden for our great theme song. And as always, our producer and fearless leader of this podcast, Mr. Christian Blatt. We'll see you guys next episode.